I want to keep talking about Russia and Ukraine, but joining me now are experts on the ground in those two countries and one other key player in the story that I mentioned, Germany. Andrei Kortunov is one of Russia's top foreign policy thinkers. He is the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Natalia Gumenyuk is a Ukrainian journalist who reports on conflict and international security. And Katrin Benhold is the New York Times' Berlin bureau chief. Natalia, let me start with you because I think you are in Kharkiv, which is 40 or 50 miles away from where Russian troops are. It's a Russian-speaking area. What is the atmosphere there, and what can you tell us about the atmosphere in those Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine?
Hi, good to talk to you. Indeed, Kharkiv is the major town in this Ukraine, and it could be an interesting explanation that if after the first shock a couple of weeks ago, they felt anxiety, what would happen because this threat is such a formidable threat. The feeling is like, okay, well, it's our town. If something happened, we don't flee, we would fight, we would resist. And so there is some level of confidence instead of, just looking at the scenarios. Of course, I should probably stress that on the ground, really nothing happens because it's still a diplomatic conflict apart from the Russian troops on the border. But it's more now today about the talks. Also, just to say that for at least 300 people who moved to Kharkiv and fled occupied Donetsk 8 years ago when there was the annexation of Crimea, when the war started, for those people, this threat, it's not theoretical. They fled from the occupied territories, so they really know how it's happened. So, being here, coming from the capital, I should say that people feel on alert but calm, and also quoting the local government or the military, they also say that they are kind of in control. However, of course, it very much depends on how the things will develop. But they definitely don't want to fight. That's, I should say, they don't want the war. So it's all about the defense.
Andrei, President Putin, or certainly the Russian government, has at various points said it doesn't want to fight. It does not plan a military invasion of Ukraine. So what are 150,000 Russian troops doing on the border, and why have they been massed in that case?
The first goal is to attract the attention of the West to Russians' concerns about the security system in Europe. And Putin stated it quite bluntly that the West doesn't want to listen to us, so we need to do something dramatic to get the Western attention. There might be another goal, however. I think that in the Kremlin, they're concerned that at some point the Ukrainian leadership might walk out of the Minsk agreements, and it might try to use the military force in order to get Donbass back. And this is something that Putin apparently is trying to prevent. I think that he would like to make sure that everybody, including Paris and Berlin, might exercise their leverage on Kyiv in order to enforce a more complete implementation of the Minsk agreements on the Ukrainian leadership.
But Andrei, it seems, at least it would seem almost mad for the Ukrainian government to choose this moment to try to retake Donbass with all these Russian troops there. There's a lot of fear in the West that that is an excuse that will be manufactured so that Russian troops can go in and claim that they are simply protecting people in Donbass.
Well, I am not in a position to judge about what the Ukrainian leadership is up to, but according to the Russian intelligence, at least that's what they claim officially, there is a major concentration of Ukrainian troops in the Donbass area. And if you follow the political discourse in Kyiv, not everybody in the Ukrainian leadership is happy about the Minsk agreements. There are many people who maintain that these agreements are detrimental to the Ukrainian sovereignty and to the national interests of Ukraine, and therefore they have to be abrogated, and some other ways of reincorporating of Donbass should be considered by Kyiv.
Natalia, let me ask you whether you could imagine the Ukrainian government going in, moving into Donbass, and more broadly, it feels to me like the Ukrainian government is actually trying to downplay the possibility or the prospect of war. Why is that?
Absolutely. So it's really, I'm also reading to a lot of what is written by the Russian media and Russian experts, which really contradicts the mood on the ground, because the current government won the elections 2.5 years ago on the platform of the peace, of the platform of the diplomatic solution, unless it's totally impossible. There were a number of compromises, and the de-escalation policy and softening the tongue and talking to numerous human rights, defenders who were, asking the government to have a softer tone. It did happen. However, there were no major concessions from the Russian side. So there was a stalemate. So it's just opposite. And even now, reading sometimes, Ukrainian government is portrayed as the ones who wants to mobilize the West. As we know, it just totally different. Vice versa, by the Ukrainian part of the opposition, the president Zelensky is even criticized that it's, he wants to calm the society, that he doesn't want to escalate, and that's exactly what's happening. But I need to stress a couple of things more. It's true that there is opposition to the president, but in this moment, I'm talking to the members of the opposition as well. There is no any major force in Ukraine, political group, who wants this war. It's all about defense. And there was no even a slight idea for the couple of last years that there could be a military solution to the Donbas. So all which is now talked, it's all about the defense. And for it's something important. In your intro, you mentioned, about the Ukrainian nationalism. So I should say it's not about the Ukrainian nationalism. Being anti-Russian here, meaning like being pro-democratic. So it's not really anti-democratic, it's anti-totalitarian. So it's all about this type of threats. It's not really about the, we speak today about civil nationalism in Ukraine.
Natalie, I've got to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask Andrei Kortunov what it would take for Putin to de-escalate. And of course, I have to bring Katrin Benhold in to get the perspective from Berlin on all of this. Katrin, let me ask you very simply. Germany does seem, your own reporting suggests, to be the weak link here in the West, more unsure of what to do. And, many people have spoken out against sanctions in the ruling coalition. Why is that? And is it changing? Because there has been recently some shift in the rhetoric.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I agree that the tone has been shifting slowly, but the messages have been all over the place. And I guess it goes back to the old question of, is Germany willing and able to lead? And I think what this has shown, this entire episode, is that the country isn't quite there yet. And it's a question that, of course, has been, we've been asking for the last 30 years. The other point to make, of course, is that Olaf Scholz has been in office for about 50 days. He's new, in that sense, weak almost by definition. He garnered about 25% of the vote. He has a three-way coalition. There are a lot of reasons why this government isn't coming across as forceful as it ought to be. But it's not just a Scholz problem. It is a Germany problem. There is 1,000 years of history. There are 2 world wars that created a baggage that makes it very difficult now for Germany to, look at Russia in any way, where the same way as the United States. So I think it's important to keep in mind that history. But the one thing to also keep in mind, you mentioned Ostpolitik, which is something that particularly the Social Democrats of Scholz look back at all the time, is that Germans like to forget the fact that, engagement is good, but deterrence only really works if it's backed up by hard power. And so we're finding ourselves in a position where I believe the resolve is firmly there, that the resolve is transatlantic, and Germany is sort of, and all 3 parties in that coalition are completely clear that they stand by their allies. But when it comes to actually paying a price, be that economic or military, there's been a lot of wavering. And so, yes, the message has not been strong enough.
It seems to me that the Biden administration is subtly and sometimes not so subtly saying, we will make sure that Nord Stream 2 is canceled, either by using Washington's economic power with the dollar, or frankly, there was a reference to, literally bombing the pipeline so that it could be rendered inoperable. Do you think it will come to that, or will Germany agree to cancel Nord Stream if there were a Russian invasion?
I think there's no doubt that if there's a Russian invasion, that Nord Stream will go away. I think it's fair to say that this is pretty clear. I think Germans hope that it won't come to that, and they want to minimize the annoyance and the irritation caused with Russia. Look, I mean, Germany is that power in the center of Europe and has traditionally seen itself as a kind of bridge between East and West. It under Merkel served that position very well. It was Merkel who, 2014, rallied all the European countries behind pretty tough sanction regime. And so there is an argument to be made that those channels of communications between Berlin and Moscow are important. But I think in this case, it has definitely gone too far. It is interesting. If you look at the language that Scholz has used and has been criticized for, calling Nord Stream 2, a private sector project, and almost, being at pains not to mention it, even now that they're saying everything is on the table, which clearly refers to Nord Stream 2. Other politicians have named it. He hasn't. And it's something that, in fact, it's almost verbatim the language that Merkel used until very recently last year. So it's not that different. The difference, of course, is that the underlying circumstances have changed. So I think Scholz is kind of committed to a policy of continuity from the Merkel era. He has said so all along, but the circumstances underlying everything have changed. What is interesting, and you pointed this out, Fareed, Putin has kind of, citing somebody else, but, Putin has managed in a way with what he's doing right now to make Ukraine a nation, which arguably in some ways it wasn't before, uniting Ukraine. He has also given NATO a reason to exist. And some now feel, as this escalates, that he may just be the reason that Germany moves from this very tortured past, from a past where it was on the wrong side of history and has struggled with leading in any way with military power, moving perhaps into a future that is different. So it's possible that Putin, ironically perhaps, might be achieving just that. There's certainly signs that the position is hardening now.
Andrei, what do you think it would take for the Russian government to de-escalate? Because as Natalia was saying, there have been efforts to negotiate between Ukraine and Russia. The Ukrainians believe the Russians are making no concessions. The Americans have held out the prospect of diplomacy. Why is it that, even though there does seem some space for diplomacy, it doesn't seem to be, the Russian government has really quite dismissed it so far?
Well, I cannot read Putin's mind. I wish I could. But if you look at the Biden's reply to the initial Russian proposals, clearly it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, the U.S. administration cannot promise a non-enlargement of NATO. It cannot make formal commitments. But on the other hand, there are a couple of positive opportunities. Maybe not game-changing opportunities, but still important opportunities that can and probably should be explored, like nuclear forces of Russia and the United States in Europe, and the resumption of the operations of the NATO-Russia Council, maybe a buffer zone between NATO and Russia in the center of Europe. So we are waiting to get a reply from President Putin, who has to address the ideas expressed by Biden. We all hope that the reply will be positive. One of good signals is that they apparently restarted the Normandy process this week. There was a meeting of political representatives of 4 leaders in Paris, and they decided to meet once again in 2 weeks from now. So the odds are that maybe the escalation is not beyond our reach. But we are still waiting for the statement of the Russian president.
Andrei Kortunov, Natalia, Katrin, thank you all. This was fascinating. We will surely be back to talk to you all. And we will be back to talk about China's COVID disaster.